Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be playing the process video of creating this cute little tea dragon that I made. I made this dragon as something for a friend. It really started out as a doodle that I had drawn in a letter, and Abigail, the friend I was writing to, she wrote a really wonderful little creative writing piece that really brought the dragon to life, and it was super cute, and I had to do something more with the doodle. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about for the video. I'm going to be talking about how I went from hating to loving art and a lot of the things that come along with that, like how I keep creating art, the different levels of involvement art has had on my life, and so on. So going back to elementary school, I was going to an international school in Malaysia, and I absolutely hated art, which, looking back on that, is hilarious because of how involved art is in my life today. But at the time, I, of course, couldn't see into the future, and all I knew were art classes that I had in school. And at the time, my best friend, Sarah, I would be in art class with her, or I would be at school and we'd hang out afterwards or during recess. And I saw Sarah's art and I thought it was so much better than mine. So that was the first thing that took me from being neutral about art, just a class that you have to take when you're in school, to actually feeling really negative about it. And of course, it wasn't about feeling negative towards all art, it was towards my art specifically, and the time that I put in, whether for the class or just messing around personally, doodling or whatnot. I just grew really frustrated because I kept comparing myself and I wasn't satisfied. And of course, at that time, I hadn't built up any skills, but even just seeing other people around me at the same level I was really discontent. Another reason I really hated art at the time was I felt like the teacher never gave us enough time. In other words, I was slow. I rarely finished pieces, if you could even call them that. It's elementary level. But what I considered to be, art projects, a lot of times I would want to keep working on it. And part of that was because I was dissatisfied, but of course the other part is I just was really slow and maybe indecisive and just kept wanting to tweak with it or mess with it, and I would have to move on. And not being able to feel like a piece is finished, and I still feel like this today. I can feel when I'm done with something, and maybe I'll come back to it later or I'll tweak it later, but for that moment in time, I can usually tell when I'm finished, and that kept getting cut off in elementary school. Of course, it wasn't the fault of the teacher. You have a curriculum, you have to, you can't just stick on one piece forever, but it contributed to my dissatisfaction. So in elementary school, art was mostly just a class I went to, kind of felt bad about myself, and I thought Sarah was super cool and her drawings are really cool, and I admired everyone else, but just secretly kind of didn't like the whole ordeal. Between elementary and middle school, I moved. So while I was in Asia in elementary, I moved back to Texas in the US for middle school, and that was a really difficult move for me. I had been living in Asia for about 3.5, 4 years, and even though I'd lived in the US before I moved to Asia, I was so young that I really didn't remember a lot of it. So my time in Asia really defined a lot of my just childhood years, and going into middle school in a whole different country that I hadn't been in for a while, and I felt different because I moved in the middle of the school year too, which is always, weird. I was not having a great time. But I know that I think a lot of people during middle school, for various reasons, don't have great times in general just because of all the weird things that happen during middle school. So in middle school, I kind of isolated myself. I felt like I didn't have a lot of friends. There are a lot of people who were very nice to me that I hung out with, and there was actually the beginning of a friendship with Abigail. I didn't really know it at the time though, because I went to 2 different middle schools and she was in the second one, so I hadn't met her yet. But art in middle school was the same thing as elementary. Nothing changed. There wasn't any drastic thing. But what did change was math class. So math, how they taught it in Asia, was very different how they taught math in the United States. And that frustrated me a lot because I felt like I understood the concepts, but how the teacher was teaching it or how they wanted me to show my work, I wasn't used to. And I was failing things in math, even though I felt it wasn't fair. So my disinterest and frustration with math turned into doodling. And you know, you have your spiral notebook with your lined paper, or you have your composition notebooks, and I would doodle things. I would mostly doodle eyes. And I'm not sure why eyes are such a popular thing to doodle, whether it's an anime eye or a realistic eye. I think maybe because it has pretty basic geometric shapes and the shading is really satisfying. Maybe that's why eyes are just a universal doodle thing to draw. Eventually in math class, it spread out from eyes. I would doodle other things. I was always a really big fan of fantasy novels and games, video games or movies. When I was younger, really big fan of science fiction as well. So I started doodling dragons or like little creatures, or I would doodle fantasy weapons like swords or axes or magical staffs, which is why I'm talking about this during this process video, because it's related. And even though I felt really isolated in middle school and just overall not having a great time in the beginning, I would be doodling in math class. I would go to the cafeteria for lunch and I would sit with people, but I wouldn't really talk with them that much at the beginning. Instead, I'd just doodle or I'd kind of keep to myself. I think I'd talk a little bit, but eventually people saw my doodles because, you know, I had my book out or whatnot, and they liked them. They thought it was cool. They complimented me. And maybe it was just them trying to be friendly and strike up conversation, or maybe they genuinely thought that they were cool. But regardless, that positive reinforcement was what slowly started to change my opinion about art and art class. And something that was functioning as an escape, mainly an escape from math, but an escape from what I generally felt like was an unfair situation or just an overall not fun time. My venting and my doodling slowly became a way for me to talk to people or feel like I was appreciated. Then I had changed middle schools. I went to 2 different ones and I met some new people again. And I had art classes in that second middle school, and I really loved that teacher. She made a really big impact on how I felt about art. I think because my positive reinforcement from other kids made me want to get better. Because I had already gotten a little bit better just from being older, but I wanted more positive reinforcement. I wanted more attention from people. So in art class, I tried really hard. I really enjoyed it. Eventually I realized, but I also tried because, you know, it's art class, everyone's sharing their stuff, right? And everyone wants the teacher to like their thing that they made. Another thing that was great about that art class is it had a lot of freedom during some of the exercises. I think one of them was combining 2 animals together, or some of the prompts were pretty open-ended. And being able to draw what I wanted to draw or what spoke to me, whether that was a mechanical praying mantis ship thing or a Zentangle bird. If anyone remembers Zentangle, that used to be a huge thing. It's just patterns of doodles that are satisfying to draw. And people would segment off like drawings and fill them and do the shading with these patterns called Zentangle. Or drawing a T-Rex. I mean, just being able to do what I wanted. And of course, not every exercise was something that I wanted to do. Sometimes it was just necessary to learn a concept. But overall, having, I think, more freedom and being around peers and being around other people, seeing what they did, was shifting my view. Another thing that shifted my view in middle school was seeing other people have similar interests as me. I remember there was one kid, Jordan, who I actually still follow on Instagram. I really liked his drawings of people. He would do drawings of like magical people, like mermaids or fairies or wizards or knights or anamorphic like people. And his style was very simple and creative, and I like the theme because I like fantasy. And another time he brought in these duct tape dragons, and they had a lot of detail to them. The wings had segments and different colors, and that was the coolest thing I had ever seen in middle school, was those duct tape dragons. I don't know if every American school kind of got hit by a very short duct tape phase of like duct tape wallets and bows and whatever else you can like cover duct tape in. But seeing people have interests outside of art class was really awesome. Moving into high school, I definitely started to enjoy the process of art. I started to see external benefits and the happiness that other people saw. If I would draw them a Pokemon or whatever else they wanted, it made them happy. So in high school, I really wanted to start investing more time into art. And my senior year, I took AP Studio Art Drawing. And it was a somewhat abnormal situation because I didn't have all of the prerequisites. At the time in high school, my dad said I had too many art credits, so after a certain point, he wouldn't let me take more art classes. But since senior year, you've already applied to colleges and gotten most of that stuff out of the way. I convinced him that it wouldn't matter what I took in my senior year as much, and that I should be able to take another art class. I had to go to the art teacher, and this was the second really influential art teacher. I had her for drawing in high school, but after that I didn't really do much else. I took her my sketchbooks that I had occasionally been drawing in throughout high school, and I basically asked her, hey, I don't have the prerequisites, but can you please, please, please let me into your art class? Because AP Studio Art is the thing, right? It's AP. You can get college credit for it. She let me in, but, she warned me, you have to work a lot in this class, so, don't make me regret my choice. It ended up fine, of course. But in high school, that was a time when I didn't love art. I was definitely interested in it, but then something happened. I had a blow to my ego again. I was in this AP Studio Art class in my senior year, and some of the students in there had already taken this class before. This was their second year taking it. Or they had been taking art classes all throughout high school, or they just had been consistently doing art or took art classes outside of school, which to me blew my mind. I was like, whoa, your parents let you take art classes outside of school? How cool is that? Part of this art class was critiquing your peers' work, or just like looking at it and like giving advice, right? Constructive criticism. As someone who I had art supplies at home, but I didn't really have the space or the time. I didn't put in consistent amounts of time. I just kind of sketched in my book. And seeing all these other people and what they could do was shocking. It was ridiculous. I mean, I knew that some people are really good at art, But I saw everyone else and I was like, whoa, colors and different mediums and just being really good. And not good in the sense of, oh, they can do everything photorealistic, but even stylized things, which I hadn't even thought of really much. That senior year, I had to create, I think it was 24 pieces in the year, like full-blown pieces. And before we even did the pieces, we had to have concept pages that mapped out the concept and composition and colors and medium and kind of a justification for what you were about to do to make sure that you had actually thought it through. References as well. And I made some bad art that year. I won't lie. Just having to work so fast, along with all the other AP classes I was taking my senior year. People who knew me, had art on the bus with me. I'd do art in other classes if I could squeeze it in. It was hard work, like the teacher had warned me. But I also made some really good art, and that was, I think, the final thing that pushed me over the edge with art to actually loving it, was being forced to make art a lot, where I didn't have time to think, you know, do I like this? Do I not like this? Do I want to finish it? No, there was no questioning. It was a routine. And that's something that for sustainability of continuing to make art is one of the biggest things. I think it's not a choice, it's a routine. Now, of course, you don't want that to go into unhealthy territory. So you don't want to despise what you're doing or resent it or feel like you're forcing yourself. I mean, sometimes you have to force yourself, but you don't want everything to be forced. For that class, it really showed me how much progress I could make in a year and what it took to see that progress. After high school, going into college, my art went way down. As in, I couldn't make art nearly as much. I didn't take any art classes my freshman year of college. Definitely not traditional art classes. I was sketching at home. Sometimes I do a painting with a friend just to have fun for a night, just hanging out. But I really didn't have the same amount of inspiration or time. But I knew that it was something I still wanted to be part of my life. But because I was really heavily involved in student organizations, I couldn't see a way to fit it in. I was also working. Around my sophomore year, I entered college as an economics major, but switched over to computer science. I had taken a class in high school for computer science, and I knew I didn't want to be in economics, so I was really lucky to get into that engineering program. And one of the reasons I looked into switching into that program was because they kind of ask you to pick a concentration or a minor. And one of the minors that I heard you could do was art. More specifically, like digital art. I kind of secretly was thinking to myself, oh, this is great. I can be an engineering major, which I knew would make my dad happy. And I can get back to art. And even though, yes, that's technically true and that's the plan I went through with, it took a while before I could really start taking art classes that challenged me or brought me up to my level, I think. Because I wasn't taking traditional art classes like drawing or painting. I'm sure if they had thrown me in there, I would have been out of my element and just struggling. But for digital art, by the time I started taking those courses, late sophomore, early junior year for college, I had already been involved in student organizations where I did design work, where I was looking at Adobe Illustrator a lot for merch designs, logos, t-shirts, branding, all of that stuff. That it felt a little bit slow, but I mean, that was okay because I'd never gotten official training. You know, I was learning off YouTube videos primarily. But that was okay because I knew by the end of my high school year that I wanted to keep art in my life, and I wasn't sure how I was going to do it at that time. I didn't even know what major I wanted to be for college. It ended up working out in the end, and even though my involvement in art went up and down, depending on other things that were going on, doing art for yourself was really important. But also appreciating other people's work and allowing them to appreciate your work and not putting yourself down. You can acknowledge where you are, but not always dismissing compliments. Getting to the point of creating art not because you want to make a favorite piece. I mean, that can happen. You can have a favorite piece, but if you hyper focus on every piece being how you want it to be, it's not always going to turn out that way. I had to learn to let go of, I want this piece to look like X and it doesn't, so I'm upset about it, or I don't feel good about it. Part of that means having to go through the whole creation process all the way through, not just sketching something, sketching it and coloring it and finishing it. Having to experience the middle and end part of the creative process. It's also really difficult to judge something when it's only partially made or halfway made. And once you get into the routine of, I'm creating art because I like to create art, or I enjoy what I can do with my art for others, or whatever your motivation is, and it stops being about, ooh, the one favorite piece. It no longer becomes about the favorite piece. Or whenever you make something good, you can appreciate it, and whenever you make something not as great, it's not as big of a blow to your confidence, because you know you're just going to make more. And I think after, I don't know how many years of actually consistently making things, I think I finally reached a point where I no longer obsess or have those really strong feelings about things I make, because you just know that you're going to make more. That process, that creative process and consistency is really what's at the core of it. And then you can look back and have this awesome record of things that you've made, which also feels great. So that's how I went from hating art, comparing myself to others, feeling slow, feeling like I wasn't good, to loving it and having a healthier relationship with it. And even though I couldn't always give it as much time as I wanted to, instead of setting goals like, oh, I want to make one piece a month, or I want to post X times a week, or just arbitrary numeric things like that. Goals are good to have, but they shouldn't be everything. And having an overall thematic leaning into art and leaning into opportunities and talking with people and investigating your community resources or classes or online communities is so much more, or was so much more sustainable for me than trying to reach a certain number of subscribers or followers for whatever art accounts I had at the time. I started out with Pinterest and I did Tumblr for a while, and then I did Facebook and then Instagram, and then I revamped Instagram, and now I have this YouTube channel. So it's been a very, very long process. The desire to have something was always there. Anyways, it was just a fun little thing to talk about. I loved fantasy creatures and fantasy art, which I still like to this day. I don't do nearly as much art about that though. I enjoy plants and clothes and people's faces a lot more, which when I was younger, I didn't do any of that very frequently at all. But every once in a while, I still like to draw a dragon. It's kind of muscle memory. For this dragon that you're seeing now the process for, I didn't use any references, and I didn't sketch it out on paper, and I've never just drawn something in Illustrator before, which, trust me, is very different from just drawing it on pencil and paper and then putting that image into Illustrator and tracing over it. So the anatomy is, I definitely recognize, a little off and not how I originally intended it to be. The color scheme was fun, the color palette. I still like how it turned out regardless. Well, thanks for listening to my conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you'll see you later.